everyone, my name's Belinda. I'm here to read the Bible for you tonight. As I was walking up, I just got some encouragement off Raz. He went, "You've got this." Good to know, thanks. Good one. It's pretty cool. Nehemiah 9 is actually one of my favourite chapters of the Bible, so I'm a bit excited to read it tonight. As is the way in the Old Testament, there are some names. I will put a Belinda spin on them, so apologies if you can speak how they should be. We're going to start in Nehemiah chapter 9. If you would like a hard copy Bible, there are some in the corners. I'm sure if you are brave enough to raise a hand, a very kind person will bring one to you. If you are, it's on page 425. Otherwise, I'll just start. I also forgot my glasses today, so I'm doing well. On the 24th day of this month, the Israelites assembled. They were fasting, wearing sackcloth, and had put dust on their heads. Those of Israelite descent separated themselves from all foreigners, and they stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their ancestors. While they stood in their places, they read from the book of the law of the Lord their God for a fourth of the day, and spent another fourth of the day in confession and worship of the Lord their God. Jeshua, Bani, Kadmiel, Shebaniah, Bani, Sherebiah, Bani, and Chenani stood on the raised platform built for the Levites and cried out loudly to the Lord their God. Then the Levites, Jeshua, Kadmiel, Bani, Hashabneiah, Sherebiah, Hodiah, Shebaniah, and Pethahiah, said, "Stand up, blessed be the Lord your God from everlasting to everlasting. Blessed be your glorious name, and may it be exalted above all blessing and praise. You, Lord, are the only God. You created the heavens, the highest heavens with all their stars, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to all of them, and all the stars of heaven worship you. You, the Lord, are the God who chose Abram and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and changed his name to Abraham. You found his heart faithful in your sight and made a covenant with him to give the land of the Canaanites, Hethites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and Girgashites, to give it to his descendants. You have fulfilled your promise, for you are righteous. You saw the oppression of our ancestors in Egypt and heard their cry at the Red Sea. You performed signs and wonders against Pharaoh, all his officials and all the people of his land, for you knew how arrogantly they treated our ancestors. You made a name for yourself that endures to this day. You divided the sea before them, and they crossed through it on dry ground. You hurled their pursuers into the depths like a stone into raging water. You led them with a pillar of cloud by day and with a pillar of fire by night to illuminate the way they should go. You came down on Mount Sinai and spoke to them from heaven. You gave them impartial ordinances, reliable instructions, and good statutes and commands. You revealed your holy Sabbath to them and gave them commands, statutes, and instruction through your servant Moses. You provided bread from heaven for their hunger. You brought them water from the rock for their thirst. You told them to go in and possess the land you had sworn to give them. But our ancestors acted arrogantly. They became stiff-necked and did not listen to your commands. They refused to listen and did not remember your wonders you performed among them. They became stiff-necked and appointed a leader to return to their slavery in Egypt. But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love, and you did not abandon them. Even after they had cast an image of a calf for themselves and said, "This is your God who brought you out of Egypt," and they had committed terrible blasphemies, you did not abandon them in the wilderness because of your great compassion. During the day, the pillar of cloud never turned away from them, guiding them on their journey, and during the night the pillar of fire illuminated the way they should go. You sent your good spirit to instruct them. You did not withhold your manna from their mouths, and you gave them water for their thirst. You provided for them in the wilderness 40 years, and they lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. You gave them kingdoms and peoples and established boundaries for them. They took possession of the land of King Sihon of Heshbon and of the land of King Og of Bashan. You multiplied their descendants like the stars of the sky and brought them to the land you told their ancestors to go in and possess. So their descendants went in and possessed the land. You subdued the Canaanites who inhabited the land before them and handed their kings and the surrounding peoples over to them to do as they pleased with them. They captured fortified cities and fertile land and took possession of well-supplied houses, cisterns cut out of rock, vineyards, olive groves, and fruit trees in abundance. They ate, were filled, became prosperous, and delighted in your great goodness. But they were disobedient and rebelled against you. They flung your law behind their backs and killed your prophets who warned them in order to turn them back to you. They committed terrible blasphemies, so you handed them over to their enemies who oppressed them. In their time of distress, they cried out to you, and you heard from heaven. In your abundant compassion, you gave them deliverers who rescued them from the power of their enemies. But as soon as they had relief, they again did what was evil in your sight. So you abandoned them to the power of their enemies who dominated them. When they cried out to you again, you heard from heaven and rescued them many times in your compassion. You warned them to turn back to your law, but they acted arrogantly and would not obey your commands. They sinned against your ordinances, which a person will live by if he does them. They stubbornly resisted, stiffened their necks, and would not obey. You were patient with them for many years, and your spirit warned them through your prophets, but they would not listen. Therefore, you handed them over to the surrounding peoples. However, in your abundant compassion, you did not destroy them or abandon them, for you are a gracious and compassionate God. So now, our God, the great, mighty, and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant, do not view lightly all the hardships that have afflicted us, our kings and leaders, our priests and prophets, our ancestors and all your people, from the days of the Assyrian kings until now. You are righteous concerning all that has happened to us, because you have acted faithfully while we have acted wickedly. Our kings, leaders, priests, and ancestors did not obey your law or listen to your commands and warnings you gave them. When they were in their kingdom, with your abundant goodness that you gave them, and in the spacious and fertile land you set before them, they would not serve you or turn from their wicked ways. Here we are today, slaves in the land you gave our ancestors so that they could enjoy its fruit and its goodness. Here we are, slaves in it. Its abundant harvest goes to the kings you have set over us because of our sins. They rule over our bodies and our livestock as they please. We are in great distress. In view of all this, we are making a binding agreement in writing on a sealed document containing the names of our leaders, Levites, and priests. If you flip over with me to Hebrews chapter 4, it's page 1063 because it's verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in time of need.
Thanks very much, Belinda, for reading that passage. It's a very long one, but an amazing passage nonetheless. Okay, can everybody hear me all right through this mic? This one's not interfering, is it? No? Awesome. I'm just going to shift it over here a little bit. get myself set up. Okay. Well, I'd love to add my welcome to that of James. As you heard before, my name's Justin. I'm the JMAP apprentice here at church, and it's an absolute joy to be able to come here tonight and share the Word of God with you guys. I'm really excited to get into the Word and see what God has to say to us today. So I'd love to ask you to pray with me as we begin. So please pray with me now. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for how old it is and how you have given us these histories of your faithfulness to your people, like Ezra and Nehemiah, to study as examples with both warnings and blessings, that we may see how magnificent you are and so draw near to you with softened hearts. Help us now, Lord, to focus on what you have to say to us. Let it change us to be more like your Son, Jesus. Amen. My first experience of getting in trouble at school was in kindergarten. I don't know if it was the same for you, but it was in kindergarten for me. My crime was that I was caught sharing food. That was my big crime. Now, the reason I shared food was because I had a friend of mine who 5-year-old Justin thought had way better lunches than me. So just to illustrate the point, where I had chicken and lettuce sandwiches on whole grain bread, which now I do admit that's pretty good now, but 5-year-old Justin wasn't a big fan of it. The lettuce went in the bin nearly every single time. I also had a piece of fruit, and I had a high-fiber oat bar. My friend, he had leftover pizza, fruit roll-ups, which is practically a lolly. I don't know how they get the idea it's fruit. And he had Dunkaroos as well. Does anyone remember Dunkaroos? They were the most elite snack I can possibly remember. So I was very jealous of his food. So can you blame me for wanting to share food with this guy? Now, our teacher got wind of the issue, and at one point I remember walking into school, into the classroom after lunch, and do you remember, you could always tell when something was about to go down after lunch, couldn't you? Because the tension in the classroom, you could cut it like a knife. So we walked in, and our teacher began sort of interrogating us. And at one point, I remember, she was just so frustrated. I think we were all sitting there terrified and in silence. So she did the old, slammed her hand on the desk and said, "Who's been sharing food?" And at that moment, I just went, stood up like a snap spring, and I said, "It was me." And I confessed. Now, in hindsight, I recognize that that was probably the right thing to do, because there's good reasons why people don't share food in primary school. You wouldn't want to give the wrong thing to the wrong person and cause some serious harm. So what I came to realize as I reflected on this story is that this is often the case in life, isn't it? That often confession's actually the right response. In this case, it enabled me to be corrected safely and to not have anybody else be harmed. I forgot that my pages were double-sided this time. I apologize. So, what I think we see from our passage tonight is that this confession being the right response idea is often also true of our relationship with God. I think in Nehemiah 9, what we learn, the big point that we learn, is that confession is the right response of God's people when we remember who He is and how we have gone astray. Now, just quickly, what is confession? Here's a really quick definition. I would say that confession is when we expressly admit our wrongdoing before God, but at the same time, we also declare His praise. I think the primary aim of our passage tonight is for us to see the stark difference between God and His people, between righteousness and sin, with all the context and weight of history behind it, and so doing to drive us to confession, as we know the kindness and the righteousness of God. Now, right at the outset, I want us to notice something about the passage. So have a look, sort of, if you can. It's hard because it goes over 2 pages, but have a look at it as a whole at the moment. There's a shape to our passage. If we start at verse 1 and go through from sort of verse 6 to verse 16, there's one really big, really detailed description of God's faithfulness, kindness, and goodness. And then we get a detailed description of Israel's rebellion against him. And then this cycle repeats. But did you notice that as the passage goes on, it gets sharper and sharper because the descriptions get shorter and shorter? I think the thing that we can get from this is that we get a sense of the amount of history that this is stretched over. It's not one time. It's over a long period of time, and it happens again and again and again. There's that cycle of Israel sinning. They suffer the consequences. They cry out to God. God saves them. They're blessed, and then they sin again. And I think that when we see this consistency of Israel's rebellion, and we also see alongside it the consistency of God's kindness, it leaves us asking this question: what do we need to bring before God in confession? And I think it also points us to realize something about confession that's maybe a bit deeper than we've thought about before. Confession's an ongoing, heart-softening practice. Confession itself actually softens our hearts. And as a result, we need to cultivate this practice in our lives as it keeps bringing us ultimately to the feet of Jesus. Now, quickly, I think it's good for us to position ourselves again in the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. So, as a quick summary, the Jewish people were sent back to Israel from their exile in Babylon. They were under Persian rule now, and they're told by the Persian kings to go and establish their city again, Jerusalem. And the leadership of a man called Zerubbabel, fantastic name, Zerubbabel, he comes first, and he brings the people back in a first wave, and they rebuild the altar. They also rebuild the temple. Then we have Ezra come, and Ezra comes back with some more people, and he teaches the people the law of God. It's after Ezra that then Nehemiah, the book that we're in, he comes back and he's tasked with rebuilding the actual city, the walls of Jerusalem. And we get this sense that as they restore the city itself, the people of God are also being restored. And in Nehemiah chapter 8, we get the high point of both books. The people are gathered under the word of God to hear the law of God taught and to celebrate God's provision. And they do this by celebrating, in the CSB, it's called the Feast of the Shelters, or you might have heard it called the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles. It was a feast around September in the year where the people remembered the goodness and provision of God while they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. So there's a high point, and I've tried to illustrate that there with this diagram. And it's after this high point that we come to the beginning of our passage in chapter 9, verse 1, and my first point. I think as we go through this passage, we'll see this beautiful prayer of confession, and there's really 3 things that have stood out to me as I've been studying it that I'd love to share with you. The first is this: true confession is grounded in the kindness and the goodness of God. Come with me to verse 6. Verse 6, chapter 9, verse 6. And we'll read here. You, Lord, are the only God. You created the heavens, the highest heavens, with all their stars, the earth and all that is on them, the sea and all that is in them. You give life to all of them, and all the stars of heaven worship you. It's poetic, isn't it? You see the total majesty of God on display here? The passage says, you are the only God who created the highest heavens to the depths of the sea. All the stars of heaven worship you. The language is so encompassing, isn't it? And the prayer goes on to describe all of the ways that God established his people and provided for them. From Abraham to Moses to the kingdom of Israel, God gave his laws, his love, and his blessing to the people. And do you notice as well how he deals with them when they rebel? Come with me to verse 17. Sorry, hang on a second. Come with me to verse 17, the second half of verse 17. It says this, "But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love, and you did not abandon them." What is God like when he deals with a faithless and rebellious people? He's forgiving, gracious, compassionate and kind, and he does not abandon his people. Do you understand how kind God is? Do you know his goodness? Often I think that advice that we get from our grandparents is right. We should count our blessings, shouldn't we? But I don't mean that in kind of like a quaint and cute way here, because in our prayer here we see that the people of Israel confess the blessings of God, and they remember right from the beginning how he has been kind and caring for them and provided for them, and in so doing it changes their posture. Remembering and proclaiming the goodness of God is an essential part of confession. Let me ask you, if you were to right now reflect on your life, can you see the countless ways that God has provided for you? I know I can. It was about 9 months ago that I was interviewed on this stage at the 6 p.m. church service about how I'd been dealing with some chronic arthritis that I've got. And at that time, it's not an exaggeration to say I was struggling to get in and out of chairs. But by the grace of God, through modern medicine, I'm literally standing here before you today. I'm sure you would have many instances like that in your life. Friends, if remembering the goodness of God is an essential part of the practice of confession, do you think that it's such a surprise that the devil does everything he can to stop us from remembering it? I don't think it's surprising. Yeah, I reckon we feel this most in the busyness of our time. You might struggle to remember how God has provided for you simply because you are at your absolute limit. I get the feeling a lot of us probably feel this today. And there's a lot of reasons for it as well, for why we are so busy, and a lot of them are out of our control. But that's why I want to encourage us today to see how we can be cultivating this practice of confession in our lives, because it's tied to reminding ourselves and declaring the goodness and kindness of God. Confession grounds us in the kindness and faithfulness of God, and it positions us before him to then rightly acknowledge our sin. And this brings me to my second point, which is that true confession acknowledges our rebellion. You see, it's after the people have begun the prayer by reminding themselves of the supreme goodness of God that they acknowledge their sin. Come with me to verses 16 and now the first half of 17. It says this, "But our ancestors acted arrogantly. They became stiff-necked and did not listen to your commands. They refused to listen and did not remember your wonders you performed among them. They became stiff-necked and appointed a leader to return to their slavery in Egypt." So, confession, of course, requires the people of God to acknowledge their sin. And they do this well in the prayer without excuse. And it happens multiple times. Again, we see that sense of the shape of the passage over time. God's consistent kindness, the people's consistent rebellion. Did you notice the descriptors of their sin? It says stiff-necked, would not listen, rebellious. I think this reveals to us the fundamental nature of sin, that it's not primarily a horizontal problem, it's a vertical problem. It's about their relationship with God. And I think the purpose of this is to see that that relationship with God and rejecting it, rebelling against it, is the fundamental cause of all sin. It's the fundamental root of all sin. When we reject God then, as the rightful ruler of all, it's no surprise that we hurt others. What happens to the Israelites when they continually rebel against God? They go straight into a whole pile of suffering. Let me hone in on one of these terms. What do you think it means to be stiff-necked? This is a picture of my little nephew, Kenzo. He's a little bit over 1 year old now. I think he's one year and 3 months, roughly. And I've had the joy of getting to see him grow up over the last couple of months. And he's sort of unlocked a new ability recently, which is that he can actually recognize your voice. And if I call out to him and say his name, he can hear me, right? Now, the other thing that I have learnt about small children, it's become very clear to me, is that they seem to face certain death approximately every 20 seconds. So when I'm looking after Kenzo, I have to keep a really close eye on him. And what I've noticed is that often, now that he knows my voice, if he's going towards danger, I can call out to him. I can say, Kenzo. And what happens is he literally turns. He turns his neck. That's if he's listening. However, recently, twice, he has had the experience of trying to ride his trike out the back door down the concrete steps. Both times, he has fallen down because his neck stiffened. He didn't listen. And he's faced the consequences of his sin. Or alternatively, I find myself having to grab him and stop him from falling. So the poor guy's got a little chipped tooth now, but he'll be all right. He'll be all right. And I want to be clear, that did not happen under my watch. Just so you're aware, that was under his parents' watch. This is what the people of Israel admit that they are like before God. If you come with me to verse 33 of our passage, we see the point of the shape. In verse 33, it says this: "You are righteous concerning all that has happened to us, because you have acted faithfully while we have acted wickedly." The people confess their own recent rebellious sin. And we get a real sense of the gravity of it, don't we? Having grasped the whole weight of history through the passage. Compared with the righteousness of God, the people's sin against him is revealed to be as bad as it is. And I think this, as the people rightly acknowledge it, it brings us to that question, doesn't it? Do we have anything in our lives that we need to be confessing before God? Have you been a bit stiff-necked lately? Is there something you need to acknowledge and bring to God? But that is not the end of the things that we learn here. Because our third and final point is this: that true confession brings us back to God. Do you notice what the people do at the end of the confession prayer? They cry out to God. If you come with me to verse 32 now, it says this: "So now our God, the great and mighty and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant, do not view lightly all the hardships that have afflicted us, our kings and leaders, our priests and prophets, our ancestors and all your people from the days of the Assyrian kings until today." Confession has brought the people back to God. Here they stand in this moment in a Jerusalem that's restored. Her temple is built, the altar is functioning, and they gather under the law of God to confess their sins rightly. They are restored to him, and it's not a small thing. And then they cry out to God for their suffering to be addressed. But there's a sense here that there's something still isn't quite right. I think the question that comes to my mind is this: where to from here? We've seen their tendency to rebel. We've seen the cycle of sin that they're stuck in. And I think we get a clear sense that this is going to happen again. It's highlighted, I reckon, at the end of the prayer by the fact that despite all the good progress, all the restoration work that we see over Ezra and Nehemiah, where do the people remain? They remain slaves under the yoke of their Persian kings. And the question is this: did God leave his people like this forever? Or did he plan for a greater restoration? Praise be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. Come with me to Hebrews chapter 4. We're going to see what God has done. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 to 16. It says this: Therefore, since we have such a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in time of need. That Jesus has changed everything. Where the people of Israel were reconciled to God at a distance, God came near to us in the person of Jesus. When the people of Israel remained slaves, Jesus has set us free from the bonds of sin and death. Once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring us to God. So for us, we can take this beautiful model of confession and we can see that it's truly fulfilled in Jesus. For us, we can cultivate a practice of remembering the kindness and the righteousness of God and have that position us to acknowledge our sin and drive us to his feet with confidence, knowing that when we draw near to God, we're drawing near to the feet of our King Jesus, who has fully and finally dealt with our rebellion, and he loves us immeasurably. True confession brings us back to God. So, to close, I want to leave these two thoughts with you. Some of you will be here tonight, and this will have struck possibly quite close to home, because you know there's something that you need to bring before God in confession. It might be that you have never once in all your life acknowledged his lordship. Or maybe you have, but you're holding tightly onto something that you shouldn't be. You may well still be in a state of rebellion against God. And perhaps you're sitting there thinking this: I'm a pretty good person. I don't have anything I need to bring before God. Can I clearly but gently say, you definitely do. Remember, the greatest sin is that stiff-necked rebellion against God. It's possible, very possible, to look like a generous and loving rebel against God. So I implore you, take that paper crown off your head and put it at the feet of the one who wore the crown of thorns. Or maybe you're the opposite. When you look at God versus yourself, you see a whole bunch of sin and you're scared to come to him. Take courage. Remember, for every look at yourself, take 10 looks at Christ. Remember Jesus, our high priest, who allows us to boldly approach the throne of grace to find mercy and grace in our time of need. God is not in the business of turning people away from him. God is in the business of restoring people to him. So I encourage you to ask for his help. Acknowledge your sin and draw near to Jesus, and he will help you. And the last thing I want to leave you with is this. Imagine if we grew this practice among ourselves. What kind of community would we be like? What would it make us like? Imagine the soft gospel hearts we would have and the way God could use us for his glory. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? So, friends, let's cultivate this practice of confession as it softens our hearts, reminds us of God's goodness, and draws us to his Son.